when I was working in a congregation before, I would have confirmation students, and I used to work in near New York City, and I would take my confirmation students to Times Square, and I would send them out 2 by 2. Anybody who knows their Bible knows what I'm doing. And they have a question to ask strangers. So right away, of course, 14-year-olds that have to go up to strangers, that's a big threshold of courage, right? But their question, get this, their question that they have to ask strangers is, what is the human being? The most highly developed animal or the lowest developed angel?
Well, here we are for round 3.
Round 3.
So Jonah Evans, welcome back. For those listening, I'm here with my friend Jonah. He's a Christian community priest. And this is our 3rd podcast in this series. Jonah is helping me kick off the Human Freedom Project podcast. And I want to recap the last 2 and then kind of see where it leads us into this 3rd one. There's so many places we could go. So maybe I'll give my recap, like what I remember, what's maybe living in me, and if you want to add to it, Jonah, if anything's missing from my recap, please chime in. So some of the themes of the last 2 conversations that we had were the 3 kinds of pain, which you brought up: fix it pain, transform it pain, and bear it pain. This led into us talking about 3 kinds of freedom: freedom from, freedom to or for, and freedom in. And your articulation of freedom in was really powerful for me. It felt like an articulation of something that lived in me but wasn't cognized. So that was really helpful. And I hope it was for anyone listening. So if you haven't, if you're listening to this 3rd one and you haven't listened to the first 2, I highly recommend listening to the first 2. We talked about responsibility. Jordan Peterson, kind of ripping on some of Jordan Peterson's work in that 2nd podcast. Grace kind of played a theme, the role of grace in the human experience, what it means to truly love. I was asking this question, like, how do we get along, Jonah? How do we love each other? And we were kind of talking about that in light of trauma and conflict and interpersonal relationships and social conflicts, and woven into the first and the 2nd conversation was Steiner's Maxim of freedom. So I'll just repeat that now for, so play a role in today's conversation, I assume. We'll see. But Steiner's Maxim of freedom is to live in love towards one's actions and to let live in an understanding of the foreign will is the fundamental maxim of free human beings. I think your articulation of in freedom to help me understand what that part of the maxim means, to live in love towards one's actions. And of course, someone would probably need to read Philosophy of Freedom if they really want to unpack this one maxim. So Philosophy of Freedom is a book by Rudolf Steiner. Jonah and I share an deep appreciation for the work of Rudolf Steiner. So that's my recap. Anything you want to add to that?
That was very good. No, nothing comes to mind.
So we were just talking before officially hitting the record button, and you mentioned that, so much lives in between, questions arise. I'm curious if any questions arose for you, or if anything stuck out to you as incomplete or frustrating or impactful.
Well, I mean, and it's hard for me to remember exactly what we covered, but if I remember rightly, I kind of felt at the end of last that it would be wonderful to kind of go a little more deeply into the freedom in, freedom from, freedom for, or to, but freedom in. That's an interesting realm because it really is a different state of consciousness, you could say. And yeah, so that stuck out for me as maybe something we could take a little bit further dive into.
Great. I have a feeling that will weave in nicely with what my burning questions are.
Good. I love burning questions.
I have a notebook here, so I might be looking down and referencing my notes. All right, Jonah, what is the role of evil in our experience of being human? And maybe in particular, and this is where I think it could weave in nicely with what you just brought up, the development of freedom.
Gosh, did we talk about evil last time? I feel like a little bit. No?
Yeah.
It was another podcast. Oh, Lord, it probably was. Yeah. Yeah, this is so fundamental. What is the role of evil?
Well, what is it? Maybe we should start there. What is evil?
What is evil? Yeah, I mean, because, many forms of spirituality, especially kind of more, if I can label that New Age spirituality, today would teach us that evil is simply an absence of good. So there's no actual evil. There's no like devil or whatever, and there's no kind of adversarial force in reality. It's just when good is not present. Kind of like darkness. It's only dark if light is not present. But I would say, in that light, evil doesn't really in that picture, evil doesn't really provide a purpose for the human. It's just the purpose is to remember the good. And that's not invaluable, but in my tradition and in my work with life, you could say, my experiences of evil, or that's a very loaded term, if I would say adversarial forces, for psychological, even spiritual beings, it's possible to perceive demons.
We did talk about that.
We did. Okay. Yeah. And I've experienced that in myself and in others. My experience thus far is that these adversarial beings and forces, for the most part, when I look at what they called me to do with my heart, they're actually, in a way, necessary to find the transformative growth, or to call up a transformative growth that I'm later grateful for. So all of the kind of evil experiences or challenges that I've had in my life, where I've perhaps perceived a person as evil in my life, doing something evil to me, for example, that also has been a bit of an illusion. It's become clear, working with that pain, that the person is rarely evil. Most people think they're doing good things. 99.9% of people. Everyone I've ever met thinks they're doing the right thing and the good thing. And and it's turned out that the evil that I experienced really was a kind of presence of an adversarial force in my own heart that is awoken through my interaction with that person, that I then project and place on them. But if I untangle it, find that this adversarial force that's actually in me, the serpent, the dragon in me, if I approach it well and I work with the eye of how can I become stronger transformationally, then most often that adversarial evil force helps me grow, helps me become more compassionate, more forgiving, more human.
Can we pause for a moment before continuing and define a little more clearly adversarial forces?
Mm-hmm.
Because the reason I'm asking is it might be, we might hear these words adversarial forces and think, oh, that, okay, there are these adversarial forces in me, awakening some kind of malevolence. But then it might be easy to bring in what you just said and say, well, but that's maybe because I'm not good, or I'm not, it's like, what are they in reality? Like if we're speaking of realities, like what is the reality of these?
An adversarial force.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, in the tradition that I work out of, the origin of the adversarial force says to the human being, you can be God. That's the origin. You can be not in the image and likeness of God, but you can be God. So that doesn't sound very adversarial at first. Maybe that's good, Yeah, I can be God. But it turns out to be adversarial only in the context of the picture of what it means to be truly human. The true human being is not to take the place of God, but to be an image and likeness of God. So the adversarial force originates as a kind of deception that can feel good, but turns out to be unhelpful. The other origin of it is in the story of Cain and Abel, when Abel slaughters his brother. And then God says, the beast is lurking at your door. And your job is to master that beast. And the beast is the impulse to murder your brother. To be all the more difficult things that live in us that don't lead us to an experience of that I'm being my best self.
Yeah. So we'll make, the 7 deadly sins, jealousy, greed, lust.
Exactly. So anytime I engage in something like those, or let's say, my daughter, hits my other daughter, they get in a fight, you can see immediately the process of guilt. Oh, I don't have to say anything. There's a force that arises in the soul that says, this is not really who you are and you could be better.
What is that force?
Adversarial.
No, the force that says you could be better.
Well, if we just stick with that, it's intimately related to the adversarial force. The adversarial force is the force that impels me to be selfish, to hit my brother, to kill my brother, to get what I want at all costs, whatever, to be jealous, to be possessive. Those are all adversarial because they're against my truest potential. And I only realize they're against my truest potential when I experience them. And then at the same time, feel, and everyone has this, it's called a conscience, feel, gosh, I could be better. That's not my true self, actually. I may rationalize it. Oh, well, I had to punch them because or I had to kill because of That's all a part of dealing with the adversarial force. But the adversarial force in us is intimately linked, it has to be, with the picture that we hold in us that is our true potential. Animals don't have that. This is what makes human beings. It's linked into what we would call the ego, the self. And that is a self, an ego, a human is the only being in nature that can step back and say, am I good? Is this good, that what I'm doing? Is it good that I'm a banker on New York City, stock exchange? Should I do something else? That's only possible because there's something in us that can step back and look at this adversarial force. Oh, maybe banking is not expressing the truest nature of who I am. But I only know that if I have this opposite force that's impelling me to become who I truly am, that lives in my conscience. So the adversarial force is, let me describe it this way, it's that in us from the beginning that awakens what I would call a beastly nature in us, awakens something subhuman in us that is battling to be dominant. The Native Americans call it, there's two wolves in my soul. One is hate, one is love. The one I feed grows, the one I starve dies. Yeah. But that I that's witnessing the two wolves, that's deciding who to feed and who to starve, that's uniquely human. My dog at home never has that decision to make because he doesn't have an I. He's just being who he is. He doesn't have that inner conflict, which brings a kind of inner anxiety, actually, unrest. The human being is innately without rest in that sense, because we're caught between two. I'll tell you a little story if I can. So, I hope I haven't told this. If I've told this stories before, you have to tell me, because I don't want to be an old grandpa that just repeats old stories all the time. So, of course, I'm a priest, and when I was working in a congregation before, I would have confirmation students, and I used to work in near New York City, and I would take my confirmation students to Times Square. And I would send them out 2 by 2. Anybody who knows their Bible knows what I'm doing. And they have a question to ask strangers. So right away, of course, 14-year-olds that have to go up to strangers, that's a big threshold of courage, right? But their question, get this, their question that they have to ask strangers is, what is the human being? The most highly developed animal or the lowest developed angel? What is the human being? The highest developed beast or the lowest developed angel? I send them out. Go and ask. And what do you think the most popular answer was? Because we would gather and then we would talk about the experiences and what everyone would answer. Times Square now.
God, you have not told me this story. And I'm filtering it through my lens of like, human psychology and what we would want it to be.
Right.
Which would probably be the lowest angel.
Right. That would be, yeah. And do you think that's what they would get mostly from people milling about Times Square?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I thought. I thought it's probably going to be New York City, tough, highest developed animal. Forget about this angel stuff.
But no.
And the interesting thing, which was just so informative to these young and also to adults, is again and again, and I think I probably did it 5 times, year after year, it would always be the same, that most people would answer both.
Huh.
And I was always impressed with the human race at their wisdom. Because this is the reality. 2 wolves live in the human being. And we have a beastly nature. This is our adversarial nature. Meaning it's adverse, it's pressing against, it's competing in a way with our higher nature. But we're also growing in our angel-like capacities. And every conscience has that innately in it. I can be better. I can be better. Now, where that better, what kind of imaginations you have as that better are very varied. But nevertheless, the force is there. And that force can only be together with an adversarial force. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the question that I can be better. So anyway, that's maybe a little picture about what is really the adversarial force. And in the Christian tradition, these aren't just forces in the human being, but they're temptations from an actual spiritual being that is, in a way, at the highest level, providing a service for the human being, a necessary service. God is allowing the devil, kind of like in the story of Job, if you've ever read it, to tempt the human being, not just for temptation's sake, but to help the human being become more human, more angel-like, more faithful, more loving, more forgiving. So that's the real role of evil. It's there to help the human being actually in freedom become truly angel-like.
Great. So maybe we could dive into that, because I experience it as a pretty complex reality. Because, a lot of people at the surface, maybe, and it's not wrong, it's a truth, it's one of these 3 freedoms we talked about, assume that to be free is to do what you want.
Oh, yeah.
But with a little investigation, I don't even think it takes much for us to admit that actually, if I just do what I want every day and nothing that I don't want to do, then I won't even get off the couch to go exercise or, have a hard conversation with someone that I've been avoiding for a week, or, any of these things that are really, really hard. So, how I might word what you just said is that we actually need struggle to develop ourselves, to develop freedom.
Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Well, there's an interesting study they even did with trying to grow bones in a space without gravity. It's very interesting. And the bone matter grew, but it grew like this. without the counterforce of gravity. The counterforce of gravity goes straight. So that's just also an interesting picture in the wisdom of our bodies, that our body needs that counterforce, that adversarial force to become upright.
Yeah. Makes me think of stepping on people. Yeah. I mean, it's, well, I'm not going to go there today. But where it's going to go are these 5 primary constraints that I'm on a mission to elucidate in light of human, developing human freedom. So I'll just name them again, and they'll play a role in every podcast. But so there's the body, which we were just talking about, and the body is a constraint. Without a body, we wouldn't be here. And then we have relationships and social life, the state, money and economics, and environments, both, natural, planetary, ecological, and then human created. So what the thread is that I want to follow with you. So we need these, something coming in, pressing in. We actually need oppression, you might even say, or something pressing in on us to develop freedom, because we need that struggle to become free, to make, and as we're in the struggle, it is a struggle between which of these 2 wolves am I going to feed? Which of these 2 aspects of me am I going to listen to and act on? So I guess I'm curious to get maybe your take as a priest when we look out at the world and we see these maybe 5 constraints. That's my framework and my language. What do you think today? So this is 2024 in our era. What's the, where do you see that struggle occurring the most? I mean, or what do you think, what are you inspired to point out and talk about? Or, maybe I'll leave it at that. It's kind of an open-ended question there, but.
Yeah.
And I can guide us somewhere else if it's too big.
You'd say it's a great question. I mean, and you see where you want to guide us, but I'm very, very happy to be surrendered to your sense for where we go. But I would say, if in my gaze looking out, and probably, as you know, I would add maybe a 6th constraint, which I would just call karmic destiny. The kind of the wisdom of what your life is bringing to you as challenge and conflict. Everyone has conflicts in their life that come usually in the form of interpersonal relationships, right?
Well, this is so relationships, and see, I feel like it's so I have a visual that I'll send you. I haven't shown it to you yet. But I have the free human being in the middle, and then the 5 constraints are like spokes on a wheel.
Okay. So maybe that fits right in with social life and relationships in terms of karma. But nevertheless, what I see as most on tap for humanity is in the realm of economics and in the realm of health. So what I see already, and even before COVID, one could start to see that, is that illnesses and health concerns, health oppressions, even something like Zoom fatigue, which or StreamYard fatigue, is a health concern, where more and more people are having to live their life online and are experiencing the oppressive energy drains that or burnout. The phenomena of burnout is massive. So what I see is more and more And I would put that in the karmic destiny of humanity. More and more, we're going to be challenged by the oppressive quality of ill health. And the question is, what do we do with that? How do we grow in and through that ordained karmic destiny? And the other place would be finances, I think, and I think we can already see that. The kind of oppressive quality of not only having to keep up with a kind of rat race, but just the kind of inflation qualities that everyone is going through, where it's harder and harder to afford a lifestyle that we imagine. Now, there's two areas there, right? It's the lifestyle I want that also fuels that. And then there's just the money, the value of money component as well. So I see those two constraints really pressing down, especially in the next coming decade.
Awesome. I wasn't actually expecting you to say those two things. I love it. This is partly why I'm starting a school.
Yeah, I love it.
To have a place for people to explore these realities so that we can guide human beings who want to be guided in this way through the health crises of our time.
Yeah, amen.
So I guess I'm curious how you view sickness and healing, in light of, and maybe we'll see if we have time for money too. These two things, but
okay, yeah. Well, maybe it's helpful to put it in the framework of the way I see pain. Fix-it pain, transformational pain, and the pain that we're called to bear. Illness, in a way, could be seen in that light, where, in general, all things that kind of oppress the human being or cause a crisis or cause a problem for the human being, one could say are ultimately there, if we look at it in the biggest picture, are ultimately there to help us become more truly human. So that's the general picture that I would say. Any illness is an opportunity to become more truly human. So
maybe before you dive fully to it, I want to share a picture I have and see if you resonate with it or not.
Okay.
It's just the theory I'm working with, the visual that came to me. Mm-hmm. So, and you'll have to use your imagination because I don't have it. But if you imagine a point, a dot, and a periphery, a circle, and the dot represents a human individual. And then we could draw two straight lines through the dot to form a cross. And my working theory right now is that pain is a vertical experience that occurs between every individual and God, or the higher hierarchies. It's a vertical experience. It goes up and it goes down. And I'm not saying it doesn't ever go out, but, I was having a conversation the other day, partly inspired by our conversations about, pain being understood versus transformed. And do you need understanding to transform pain? Can it be transformed without understanding? And it led, kind of to this realization that actually nobody can know what it was like. No. So there's understanding and knowledge kind of go hand in hand. nobody can actually know what it was like to be me through the traumas I went through, for example, or you can tell me about something really painful that you've gone through, but I can't know your experience, but I can bear it with you. I can be in it, I can sit with you. I can have compassion. I can listen. I can try to understand.
Yeah.
And then sickness is a horizontal line. And the reason for me it's on the horizontal is it's on the earthly, it's very earthly. It has to do with a body. It has to do with toxicities, maybe. It has to do also with social life. Like I see social life actually playing a role to some degree in the sicknesses we experience. So anyway, that's my visual. I'm curious if that.
Nothing jumps out at me as something that needs to be reorientated, but it sounds like a framework that could be helpful to separate sickness and pain.
And just to clarify too, the point is in the middle, so they cross.
Yeah.
So an illness, a sickness, can be experienced as painful.
Yeah.
But the pain of it again is on vertical for me.
Yeah, I like that because it starts to distinguish also where do I link in to transform in relationship to myself and God. Right? So if I'm just trying to solve the sickness and I'm not touching in on the pain because it's the pain experience that only I know, like you said, and that you can have empathy for, but only I can work with and know. It's the pain doorway that links us to the transformational experience between myself and God. And if I just medicate the pain away, or decide that the pain is just an illusion, then I don't have that doorway. I'm not activating that doorway that is actually the place where I can start to transform. I think that's a very good distinction.
Great. So I wanted to just give that visual for you and everyone else, but now I'd love for you to come back to these three kinds of pain. We're going to dive into sickness then, right? Because we're in an era of health crisis.
Yeah. So in a way, but that's very helpful to just say, okay, well, it's the pain doorway that actually leads to the becoming more truly human. Now, if we go back to my picture of fix-it pain or fix-it illness, transformative illness, bearing illness, one can just see that in everyday life. For example, if anyone is a parent, they know that there's such a thing as fix-it pain, because your child comes to you with a skinned knee, and you're not going to, or at least I hope that you're not going to sit there and have a counseling session with the 4-year-old on how to connect and transform in and through their pain. That would not be appropriate. But nevertheless, you're there to respond in a more or less healing way to the pain that also teaches the child. For example, I could say, oh no, your knee is skinned, and oh my gosh, you can't run again. Don't run. I mean, I know a wonderful person whose mother wouldn't let them run because for fear that they would skin their knee, right? So that way of being in relationship to pain is not helpful for the child's becoming. Nevertheless, when I see a skinned knee, I say, oh, this is what happens. And we skin our knees. Here's a Band-Aid. Boom. Fixed. Oh, thank you, Daddy. Even just saying fixed as a daddy or a mommy, it's interesting what that does to the child's pain. It's like it helps it a bit. So that's one relationship to a sickness, something that can just be one can feel how do you relate to that can be more or less human, but also it sometimes things just call for a Band-Aid or a splint, or take you out. Your hand is on the fire, get it out and put water on it. Yeah. And then there's transformational pain. So I'll tell a story to illustrate that. Or, I mean, of course, there's so many stories, right? You told your story, which is a beautiful experience of transformational pain. But I guess since he's on my mind, I'll tell that one. I had a friend, Ralph. Did I tell the story of Ralph before? Good. Ralph Johnson, who was a congregant, or kind of loose congregant in my congregation in New York. He was a good friend, and we would go to movies together. And he was a health food expert. So he had 5 health food stores, and he ate biodynamic, macrobiotic. He took all the supplements that you take. He exercised, and he was the picture of health. And that was his religion, so to speak. And then he began to feel unwell, and it turned out he had colon cancer. And I remember it was one night, and I had the feeling before I went to bed, I had the feeling this human somehow needs to be baptized. He was a practicing Buddhist, and he came to the church once in a while, but he was really wounded from the Catholic experience growing up. But I just had this strong feeling somehow this person needs to be baptized, and I mean that in the most living way possible, not just saying words. And then the next morning, he calls me and he says, Jonah, I had this terrible night. Because we had been talking also about his cancer and just working with it. And he said, I was kind of in a lucid dream. And I was in this abyss of blackness. And my soul just felt so alone and empty and powerless. And he said, and then in the midst of that, I felt this incredible rage and anger at God arise in my soul. That how could this be? I've dedicated my life to the pursuit of real health. And I'm 59 years old, and this is what I get in return? Colon cancer. I'm supposed to be the healthy one, teaching people about health, and this is what I get. He said, a tremendous anger arose in my heart. Along with this kind of feeling of alone and powerlessness, and in that milieu of his heart, he called out for help. What am I to do? I'm desperate because I feel like I'm dying. And in that dream, he then goes on to say, and again, I had thought this human needs baptism. But he described to me, without me having said any of that, he described to me, in that moment of calling out, I felt this being come close to me. And he didn't give it a name. He just said, I felt this being of love come close to me. And he said, he embraced me. This being embraced me over my head and around my chest, a strange picture. And he said, in that moment, I felt a kind of love that I had never felt before, but I felt I always knew I was looking for. And he said, it felt like home. I'd always been longing for a kind of home, he said. And in that moment, I realized he said, that all of my longing and work to find real health was actually looking for this kind of love and this kind of home. It's just I was looking for it in bananas and vitamin C pills. And here it is. And he spoke with this enthusiasm of this discovery and this liberation from having searched and searched and searched for bread at a hardware store, so to speak. And oh my gosh, this is what it's about. And he said to me, it was so moving. It brought me to tears. He said, there's nothing I want to do with the rest of my life but to try to radiate and bring this love to other humans. And he died about a month later. But his soul had been transformed. The pain of his cancer, and he did say right before he died, he did say, I know why the cancer came. To awaken me to Christ. And he was able to say that. And just before he died, he asked me, teach me how to pray. I want to be in communion with this being of love that feels like when I'm in his presence, I feel at home. I feel in freedom, in the graced giftness of deep love. So it's not freedom from, he was trying to get away from all the religious nonsense he grew up with. Not freedom for, the freedom to pursue health. But he found the liberating space of freedom in, which is always a grace, a gift. And he realized at the same time, his illness was a gift. Even though he took it through death. And so that's a real it's just such for me, a moving story of transformational sickness or transformational pain. Yeah. He hadn't entered that pain in that way and cried out from its depths. His vertical axis, as you described, wouldn't have been changed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful story. I think it speaks to so much of, I think, what we're looking at with these constraints, these 5 constraints, and what we're being called to truly grapple with. Because everywhere, I'm basically not on social media other than YouTube, and everywhere I look on YouTube, it's like, it's probably the algorithm, knows me to some extent, but, it's follow these 10 biohacks to live forever. You can now live to 180 supposedly, but nobody's done it yet. But supposedly they're going to. It's, like I heard someone else just say the other day that we're supposed to live in health and abundance. It's just that the government and the chemical companies and the toxicities that are whatever. And it's like, that's not untrue. It's, but
it's a half truth. Yeah.
But it's, I hear this all the time, and it's, one of my missions with this podcast is to help orient human beings who are, in my opinion, we're all struggling inside. Mm-hmm. And if it's not you who's sick, it's going to be someone you know and love. If it's not you in pain, it's someone you know and love. To normalize illness. Like it's not, we treat it like like it's not normal. And if we could just change this or that or fix things, then we could all live in hell forever.
That's right. So it links back to what I mentioned in the beginning, the spirituality that says evil or difficulty or sickness or pain or lack or scarcity, whatever. These are all just an absence of good. If we would just be our true nature, none of these things would exist. And they shouldn't if we're rightfully connected to God. That is the most popular form of spirituality today. It's everywhere.
Right. And then there's the other religion. There are all these other religions, we might call them, coming into the world. Like, if I just eat this way and avoid the toxins and eat the best quality food and drink the structured water and use crystals to harmonize it. And, hey, I have crystals in my house. Yeah. But, then we should be healthy. And if you're not, it's like, but what it does is it produces, we feel other. Something's wrong with me then. I'm the not normal one, because if I'm following the rules, if I'm eating the right things and not eating the things I shouldn't, and I'm sick, then yeah. So
exactly. It's the same spiritual impulse from another direction that has more to do with it. I'll use that name, manifesting. If I just align my being right, the reality that I experience will be materialistically wonderful. When I say materialistically, I mean I won't be sick, I'll have a lot of money, I'll have a great relationship, all things will be making me happy. Which is a very different picture than what was revealed from my friend Ralph, or from your story, or from my story that I think I told last time, where sickness, pain, and difficulty is not an accident or an absence of good. It's actually meant for us to actually become truly human. So this whole idea that we shouldn't have to deal with oppression, we shouldn't have to deal with sickness, that's a sign that we're far from God. This is not the case. Actually, God is found exactly in the place of brokenness, exactly in the place of on your knees. And that's a difficult pill for us to swallow. Granted.
Yeah, and it also, I think, is quite a paradox for us to wrap our minds around.
Yeah, and it's a paradox. And what's also interesting is that many human souls today who are attracted to these kinds of spiritualities they're kind of interested in getting away from the idea that there's a God who's going to make me feel guilty and I'm going to have to follow rules and all these things. There's a right way to be. If you just behave, you get to heaven. Understandably, wanting to get away from those things, which I also don't find them helpful or helpful as a priest even. The ironic thing, though, is that people who are trying to get away from guilt often work with these manifesting and other kinds of forms that if I can just be right and do the right things and eat all the right foods and think the right thoughts, my life will be good. Find that they're not able to do that, as you just mentioned. That actually you can't get rid of these karmic destinies and these certain oppressions that are inlaid in reality. And I end up feeling more and more guilty about my own capacities as a result. So I'm trapped in the same guilt I was trying to get away from the Catholic Church. Speaking me on the back end. Because I can't quite ever manifest my perfect life, because actually that's an illusion. It's perfection in that sense is not what the human being is truly destined for.
Can we try to clarify then the difference between that version of perfection and the ideal that it is helpful to aim for. Because this is, because without an aim, we're aimless,
Exactly. So it's not about not having an aim. It's about having an aim that is enlightened by what is deeply, truly human. What is the hope of God? You could put that like that. So, but we need an aim. Otherwise, we're not going to find the goal. So, for example, if we're schooled then by the experience I talked about as a parent, dealing with the skinned knee, the aim is not to take away and say, oh, we should never get skinned knees. The aim is to say, it's how you relate to pain, dear child, that's always going to be there. That is the aim of the healthy human heart. I'm going to model that for you first. We go to Ralph. You say, in Ralph's experience, the cancer actually blessed him because he related to it in a particular way. He worked with it in a particular way. So the aim, if you really stay true to that picture, it wouldn't be to get rid of all illness. But illness is a gateway to deepening my relationship with God and with the being of love and with my true nature. Then, anytime illness arises in me or others, I'm not looking at it as something that's a sign that I'm separate from God or separate from my abundant life, but I'm looking at it as an opportunity to enter even more into true abundance, which is love and freedom awakened through the cross. So you see, that's a different image. That's a different intentionality that we would have towards sickness. It's a different aim. And if we would come to the third way of bearing pain or bearing illness, that also has a whole structure of intentionality, a whole aim nature, a whole intention, because one could say, if one's working with a more manifesting spirituality, that you shouldn't have to bear any pain, because actually that's not your true nature. You can just manifest that. If we all just manifest that away, it would work. So here's a story. I have a child. Her name is Saskia. She's my second daughter. I have 3. And she, long story short, she got sick with a deeply rare genetic disorder in her kidneys. And it came to light when she was 1. I remember, because she could have died, and I remember feeling this incredible, the pain that one feels for your child is so intense, unlike any other pain that I know of. And it totally brought me to my knees. And I prayed, Lord, take this from my child, please. Take this pain, take this illness. And yet, kind of like the Apostle Paul in chapter 12 of the book, second letter to the Corinthians, your Bible friends will know. The response was not that this should be taken away, but that that led to deeper and deeper levels of grace, carrying this. The response was, Christ, this being of love, is carrying this. And if I want to get closer to my humanity, I'm going to have to learn to bear this without fixing it, without necessarily transforming in and through it. But the very bearing of an unsolvable illness is going to have an effect on me and others that is going to help us deepen as a community, deepen our hearts in compassion deepen our capacity to be more like God, Christ, who is carrying us also and experiencing our pain and not fixing it necessarily. If God wanted to fix the world, he would do it. So my deep learning, what I would say one of the most important experiences of my life, maybe the most, as a priest, as a one who can walk in love in as much as I can. It's been as a result of this unsolvable illness that I have carried and borne, inspired by the being of love, in my daughter. And there's nothing in my life that has gotten me closer to experience of God than being called to bear this unsolvable illness. So that educates me that there are many things in the world that are not meant to be solved so that we can learn this kind of bearing that also God is doing with us, so that we can get closer and closer, being transformed in his image and likeness, to being our angel-like self, in the image and likeness of the one who bears all human suffering.
Were my saying, well, first, I remember you sharing about that a long time ago, and I was very, very touched. And how old is Saskia now?
She's 11.
How's she doing?
You probably, if someone saw her, they would not notice. She's really thriving. And yet, she takes enough potassium in one day that would kill a horse.
Wow.
Like one of those bottles of potassium pills you can buy at the store. She takes one whole bottle a day. It would stop your heart if you did that. Yeah. So she's carrying an illness picture that interestingly has transformative effects for lots of different people in an incredible karmic community, including myself, that has brought us more forces of deep humanity like forgiveness and long-suffering and compassion and bearing, patience, than would have been without it.
It's beautiful, Kelly.
Wow, she's a gift, a real gift, and I can honestly say that. And her illness is a gift.
Yeah, I'm aware, it does feel like such a fine line and a razor's edge of maybe understanding or reality, and the difference between reality and illusion, and true bearing versus maybe giving up or throwing up your hands in a way. So one of the things that I'm always kind of it's going to be funny to say this, but grappling with is when it comes to these spiritual doctrines, if you will, that very much feel true to me, that I am living with all the time and attempting to understand, is the necessity of grappling in life. So this is where I feel like I'm coming maybe from the earth up, and very much am a tactile, body person. Because if she didn't take that whole bottle of potassium, she'd probably die.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we're called to take action. We're called to do something. We're not, Like bearing pain doesn't mean I surrender. I'm going to lay in my room.
Oh, good. Very good. Yes. No. Right? I mean, I'm not resigned. In fact, if I resigned inwardly, it would start to have an unhelpful effect on my relationship with that unsolvable illness. If I resign and just say, I give up, it would start to generate in my soul a kind of resentment. And of course, if people have unsolvable problems, it doesn't mean that it leads to more compassion and more forgiveness and more love. It can just as easily lead to more hate and anger and bitterness that you can see that in a human biography. It depends on how you relate to it as to what it starts to affect in your soul.
So I think what I'm trying to point to is there's the inner work. There's the relating to, which is an inner thing. It might produce an outcome, an action, a behavior in relationship to other people or the world. But it could also be, taking a whole bottle of potassium pills or taking a different kind of medication or following a different, eating the biodynamic food. It's like, this is the mystery, right? So we're being called to take up our work in practical life as much as inside.
That's right. And I would point to, like, I could have resigned, but I could have also said, okay, well, I'm going to fix this, and I'm going to, she's going to eat only about it, and I'm going to constantly carry this expectation that if I'm doing the right thing, this illness will go away. Mm-hmm. And I can also corrupt my heart in that way by being so active, but not learning to actually surrender to the secrets of these bearing mysteries. So surrender does not mean resignation. It also doesn't mean I'm going to make it different. But
this is what I'd love to tease apart with you, because this is I think the hardest thing for maybe me to understand personally. I don't know, maybe it's easy for other people to understand it, but I suspect it's difficult for anyone grappling with these concepts and realities, because maybe we move to economics, because I think it's a good example. So we're living in a time right now where, inflation is skyrocketing. We're rather fortunate to live in a dollar-based society for the most part, even though actually it's like at the root of so much of the financial ills and sicknesses elsewhere. But, there's talk of the U.S. economy collapsing. From what I know, with my dad being a money historian, that's inevitable. So I agree. It's coming. We don't know when. Could be tomorrow. Could be 50 years from now. And then we're all being called to work for our daily bread, so to speak, to provide a roof for ourselves or our family. So it's like, okay, so the reason I feel like this might be a good example is, so there's like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, in the economic realm, the difference between, say, fix it pain, transform it pain, and bear it. Like, at what point are we supposed to maybe fix the economic system, if you will, or fix what's unhealthy? It's like, in an unhealthy organism, like if I get a splinter, my body in its infinite wisdom says, does not belong here. And if I don't pull it out, it'll push it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And I see that occurring in the financial realm as well, where there's a sickness here. There's something that doesn't belong in a way, and the organism is attempting to maybe push it out, or but there's a way that we could, as human beings with freedom, to to do something, right? And it's not going to be everybody called to do this, but or just bear it. It's like, well, this is the way the economy is, and I have no choice but to accept that the Federal Reserve, was created in 1913, and that's the money system we have. And I know it's a complex topic, Jonah, but.
Well, right. But even in the way you describe the bearing, it sounds more like resignation to me. Yeah.
Okay.
So
this is what I'm trying to tease apart. Because
bearing picture would be it would be more like this, and it would have to be discovered. All bearing has to be discovered in and through attempts to fix and transform.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So this is very important, right? It's the same with your spouse. If you ever try to have a spouse or a partner, you're going to try to fix them. And you're going to try to transform the bad stuff. And then you're going to come to a point where you see, if you actually follow through and continue to be active, there's certain things that actually are not fixable and are not there to be changed, but to be carried with. Not resigned to, that would cause resentment, but karmically carried with as something that will help soften and tenderize my heart to patience, long-suffering, compassion. That's when it's proper bearing. So, for example, if I'm properly bearing the Federal Reserve as a reality, I'm not saying, that's just the way it is, we can do nothing. That will build resentment. And I'm also not saying, I have this. If humanity is going to reach its goal, the Federal Reserve has to be abolished. That would be only if we fix this world and make it painless is our humanity found. So the proper bearing would be okay. The Federal Reserve and its activities and the spiritual beings of darkness working through it, because our battle is never with human beings, but spiritual powers of darkness. Ephesians 6, for any of you Bible nerds. It's allowed by God to help us go through something and find a new transformation in society. It's a sickness that allows us to become more deeply human in and through bearing it.
So maybe this question will help. I always feel ineffective at asking the question. I'm like trying to ask something and then I'm like, no, that wasn't. How do I ask this question appropriately? So there's what we aim at for the internal, right? How do I relate to this? The relating. It's being in right relationship to pain, to the struggle, to the temptations. So my question now is, should we be aiming at anything in the external world? Like, a different, like, what should we be aiming at in the external, not the internal?
Well, it depends. It depends on what image and spirit you're inspired by. You see, you've hit the nail on the head with that question, right? So, what is the goal? Is the goal to make this world perfect? To make a society in which no one is in pain and it has problems and everyone has material abundance? Is that the goal? If that's the goal, then of course you want to fix and aim for lots of things material. Yeah. You want to fix the Federal Reserve. You want to fix the fact that there's a power structure among nations. You want to make poverty obsolete. You want to do all kinds of things. You want to make, you want to make the material world heaven on earth.
Right. So Mike, why have Waldorf schools, Christian community, churches? Why do any of that in the practical, here on earth? What is the aim?
Right. So the aim of true Christianity is different than making the world perfect. What it says is the world is actually controlled by an adversarial being. Ahriman, some people call it. The devil, Satan. And this is shown in the Gospels where Christ encounters the adversary in the desert. And the adversary offers him the whole world. You can be the king of the world. I'm going to give you everything. All of the whole thing, the beauties, the whole world. How is that his power to give the world? That means God has allowed it to be taken over. And what Christ says, no thanks. I'm not going to bow down to you in exchange for being the king of this world, because I am the king of another world that is now coming into this world, but it's super sensible. It can't just be seen by a normal eye. It's the heart's eye has to be awakened. So that world has a different lawfulness. Its lawfulness is expressed in things like victory is death on a cross. That's total lunacy for the lawfulness of our world. But this is the interesting Christian mystery, that a different type of reality has come in and is now burgeoning like a seed gradually within a world that is controlled by an adversarial being. And Christ does not come in and exterminate that adversarial being. He allows it and lives and suffers in it, through which are creating a new heaven and a new earth. But it's not material. Part of that new heaven and that new earth are forces like love, compassionate love, selfless love, forgiveness, long-suffering, patience, transformation in and through pain, bearing. In the esoteric Christian perspective, those things are not nothing. They're actually signs and pictures of the real world that exists in the broken world. The truly real. I mean, we could ask ourselves this question: what is most real? What is most precious and most real to us in our lives? It's usually these deeply transformative moments and everything that grows out of them. So if I switch my gaze to saying it's the material world that's the real world, and I have to make sure that's perfect. If I switch my gaze to, well, the material world and its imperfections and difficulties is just the stage and the womb upon which an embryo of love can be developed, then I have different eyes. Then I'm saying I'm not going to ignore the outer world. I'm not going to ignore the material world. I'm going to work fully in it. But my goal is not to make it perfect. My goal is to give birth to these transformative experiences of love, hope, faith, deep trust, compassion, patience. It's kind of like a coach. I don't know if I've ever given that analogy. Like a good basketball coach will not put all emphasis on the outer results of winning and losing, even though that's a reality. And that's what the worldly world will recognize in the end. How many wins, how many losses. But a good coach will say, okay, that's a reality, and we're going to work to win. We're going to work in that realm, but we're not going to make that the most important thing. The most important thing is how you play, the character, the morality with which you play, and the transformative experiences of the players along the way of the journey of being on a team. That's the most important thing. Who is becoming a better human being in and through this experience? So that can't happen if I just say, oh, I'm just going to resign. It also can't happen if I just focus, damn it, it's all about winning and losing. Then I've lost the plot.
Yeah, I hear everything you're saying, and I think I'm not satisfied.
Yeah, good. I love it. Tell me what thought keeps ringing in your mind.
It's that, like, one filter, one lens I could filter what you're saying through might paint a picture for me of my life consists of, I go to work, I have my relationships. When pain occurs, okay, is it fix-it pain? Is it transformative pain? Is it bear-it pain? And I'm just I'm engaged in life, so I'm not disengaged. I'm active in it. But it's really all about, in some way, me. and it's like, okay, probably, I'm just taking a guess, without somebody having decided that they were going to be somebody to help people like your daughter, you wouldn't even know that she needs potassium.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm getting at is, like, what, and that might even have come from someone who decided, I want to eradicate disease.
Oh, yes, exactly. Okay, I see what you're saying. No, I'm not saying you're not. Like, I have an activist in my congregation, and his whole mission in life is to free the Palestinian people from oppression. So you can imagine how he's doing right now, right? It's very difficult.
Yeah.
His whole mission, he's on a mission to eradicate the oppression caused by, at this moment, primarily in his mind, Israel, towards the Palestinian people. And I don't discourage him from that. Right? Because it's the very inspiration of an ideal that helps us engage with the world.
This is what I'm trying to get at with the world. So when you say that the aim in that regard with the world is individual, it's unique, it's that karmic thing the sixth thing that you were trying to bring in. Is that accurate?
Well, so the point is, in that picture, the most real substance of his life, though, if you just look at his life objectively, is not in solving all the Palestinians' problems. But if you look at his life, what's been most valuable is this deep transformational experience for him and others in what I'll call just now the work of awakening compassion, seeing the suffering of others as a way to waken up. That's been the most real love substance. But that's only come about because he's deeply engaged in trying to solve it. Yeah. So I wouldn't discourage that. What I would do is say, I would encourage just looking at those more softer elements, you could call them. There's more transformational elements. There's more moral substances and character building processes that come about as a result of trying to make that happen. So, and gradually, one may then discover for oneself this more bearing quality. But you can't force that. It's just like with a spouse. Every spouse, especially wives, they want to change their husbands. And you can't force the bearing acceptance. But it gradually comes about only in and through the work to try to change them. Hopefully. So, and yet, if we're schooled, and of course not everyone is schooled in the deep Christian pictures. If we're schooled in the deep Christian pictures, it can be helpful because it shows us, ultimately it's not about making everything in this world perfect. It is about, though, engaging this world fully in order to grow the seed of love, hope, trust, patience, that will become a new heaven and a new earth in the New Jerusalem.
So let me try to repeat back what you're saying. You tell me if I got it right. In my own words. That each of us might be called to something. And it might be a desire, a wish, a longing to fix something, to make something better, to take away pain.
Total.
And that is actually an important part of this whole thing we're doing.
Right. The only way I learned the 3 types of pain was to go for it. I think everything was fix it at first. Yeah. And be taught by reality.
Okay. Here's where I think I'm struggling. What you just said, okay, so I had to go for it first. No, so did I. And then I think I think maybe what I'm struggling with is like, okay, so I have this awareness now. I have a picture of reality. I have the why. I have the context. I know where I'm supposed to do inner work. And then it's sort of like, okay, now that I know that there's some awareness in me, and I know you're not saying this. This is just my dramatization of the of the question I have. But like, so now that I know that, okay, I step back. I don't try to fix anything. I don't.
Well, you just work harder at the right aim.
That's what I'm trying to get at. So, what is the right aim, Jonah?
Maybe if I can push it back on you, what do you hold as the goal for humanity? How do you imagine that? Because everything at this level of the work, so much depends on what we hold as the picture of our ideal. And this is actually deeply important in the psychological work. Because if I'm carrying and committed to and yesing, fixed on a picture that my life should look like this, then I will be constantly bumping up against that ideal, and everything will be guiding me and being powered by that ideal. Wherever wherever your heart is, there will your treasure be also. So the picture is, what am I setting my heart on? So I would ask you, what are you, how how are you setting your heart on the picture of what is ideal for humanity? What does that look like for you?
It's a good question. I mean, being the founder of this thing called the Human Freedom Project, and freedom really being like the central theme of my life, I come back, what came to my mind is now Steiner's Maxim. Now, of course, that's, I know.
Okay.
And,
Go for it. Fill that picture out.
Yeah.
And
to live in love towards one's actions and to let live in an understanding of foreign will. So, and it's an incredibly complex thing to tease apart, this one sentence with a comma. To see a world where each individual is supported to contribute their unique gifts, I guess. I think our whole conversation will be helpful for this, coming from the right place, from the right, not I want, or, this is my kingdom and I'm going to manifest, but coming from a true reverential place of love and offering to the world. This is coming, I have something to offer. That's the letting live, to live in love towards one's actions, and to let live, loving your actions, where each person is encouraged and supported to live in love towards their actions. Yeah. And to let live in an understanding of foreign will. Now, I mean, this is, in a way, right? I could easily paint a picture of heaven on earth. Right? On some.
Well, this is the thing. It is on earth. And that formula actually points to the reality of that heaven on earth. But that is not make the material structure of the earth perfect.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that. It says, love whatever you do. Whatever. And the most challenging things often give the possibility of awakening the strongest forces of love. And then it says, let live in constant attempts to understand the foreign will. Okay, so what's more foreign than the Federal Reserve?
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
So if that's really your picture of what is heaven on earth, which actually in the Christian conception, that's a description of heaven working on earth. It's just, it doesn't fix everything. Love doesn't fix everything. It necessitates a foreign will to be constantly struggling to understand. That's also marriage.
Or a body.
Or a body. Or a child that you're parenting. So in the very, as you worked to kind of think about that and structure that, in the very image that you're holding necessitates brokenness. Or
maybe this will help. Like, I feel called to build this school, the School for Living Science, to create a place where people can come learn about the whole human organism without it being a government-regulated institution. And that's, I'm not trying to oppose it. I'm just over here building, right? This is what I'm called to offer the world. Because what I would love to see manifest in the world, not to take away pain, but I would love to see hospitals, let's say, where the sick and the in pain can go, where human beings are there who understand what a human being is and can make sure they rest properly, that there are plants in it, that there's good air for them to breathe, that it's dark at night, that they can still call for help if they need it, that, there's an understanding of what our needs are, both physically and spiritually, so that when we are sick and in pain, there are places we can go to be guided through it that are loving.
Beautiful. Right? So why bring that thought now in this context? That feels to me in my heart like you're getting out a thought that really needs to be said.
Yeah, I think it's because sometimes in these conversations, and by the way, I love the grapple. So
yes, no, this is good. We love it.
Yeah, so I think it's because if maybe I've had this long-standing grapple in myself of like, well, on the one hand, if I understand the reality and the necessity of pain and the adversarial forces, what I might actually do if I wanted to help humanity is to create more war and violence and chaos, because, that's...
I see.
I'm, or at least not get in its way.
Yes. Right. But okay, I hear you. I see what you mean. But think about your own experience. It's not as if you just resigned to the difficulties you were experiencing in your body. You didn't just, okay, this is how it's meant to be. I'm just meant to be broken. Or I'm just meant to be wounded by this fellow when you were 13. I'm just going to resign. You didn't do that. But you also didn't fix it. Like, your body is not fixed. That wound is not fixed. It's become a place through which you become more human, experiencing graces and transformations. So it's not, the actual human reality is not in just saying, oh, well, that's just how it is. It's also not in saying, okay, that what you just described sounds wonderful, sounds perfect, sounds like a utopia. But the reality is that all kinds of constraints will be present in that little place that you just described. And they will put people through all kinds of different possibilities of deepening their heart. And you don't say, oh, well, that's just, no. You say, we're going to meet those in such a way as hopefully we can learn deeper mysteries of transformation and bearing.
Yeah, I think what maybe
something needs to be fixed, we'll fix it.
Yeah, what where I seem to not have words, or don't not quite know how to get out what's in me, is sometimes when I hear you saying, that we're not here, the goal isn't to perfect the earth, or to take away the pain, to make it a blissful, experience. And I agree with that.
Yes, you do.
I very much do.
Yes.
And there's this other part of me that's like, okay, then what are we called to do to meet those experiences more fully human? Which maybe be, because that's something to aim at in real practical life. Like, I think that's what I'm getting at, is like, because I get the inner work. I've been there for decades and decades now. And it's like, what does that look like in practice? So, it's like, because on the one hand, I might listen to you and say, oh, I shouldn't even bother building this thing that's calling me to be built,
right. Which would be a total misunderstanding, right? It would be falling into resignation. It's like this. We actually can't escape it. Life is bringing us these crucibles. Period. Even though we may have the ideal to make this perfect place, the mature soul says, yes, I'm going to follow that picture, but I'm also going to know that within it is going to be its own cross. It's going to be its own place of struggle and transformation. So that's all I would say, is that as long as you know, yes, you have the star, and I'm going to strive toward, because nobody does anything if they don't have a star. But I'm going to be mature. I'm going to bring my life wisdom, because I've experienced it. I know what transformation is like. And I'm going to bring that to the star. I'm going to bring my heart to the star. And know the difficulties and oppressions that arise in that journey as I create this new hospital. They're not just inconveniences. They're not just problems. I stop blaming whatever and say, whatever oppressions come toward me, I'm going to try to look at as possibilities, as necessities, as needed for the heart to become human.
Mm-hmm. That was very helpful. That helped me know that you understand, well, I think, what I've been trying to ask. So we each, and this is probably a perfect place to start to wrap up this podcast. So we have these 5 primary constraints that I want to talk about on this podcast with a whole bunch of people. And, some people that I bring on are going to have, say, expertise or opinions on money and economics and maybe Bitcoin or, I don't know. And just about everybody I know or that I will want to talk to, other than you, I think, which is why I wanted to start with you, wants to fix something,
Yeah.
Wants
to make the world a better place. Yes. Amen.
Yes.
Amen. And maybe it's interesting to think about it like this. Rudolf Steiner describes that. Rudolf Steiner, our friend here. He says every single ideal that a human being has is born and at first is Luciferic. And what he means by Luciferic, it means it's kind of a utopia, an abstract kind of picture without any problems. Yeah. And that's how every ideal is born. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. It just means that's the initial impulse, is a kind of abstraction, a kind of utopia, a kind of place that is perfect, but without reality. And then it's not that we stop, but the striving for that, the working to bring that ideal into incarnation will give us the opportunity, he calls it, to Christianize our ideals. Mm-hmm. Not that we just become Christian, no, meaning that the light that we see starts to be dipped in death and resurrection. That our ideals start to be places in the attempt to work them into reality, places where the human heart goes through, and human hearts in community go through processes of death and resurrection, dying to an old self, being renewed and reborn in a new self, much more human, hopefully. Or that those processes lead to becoming more and more beastly. And the hope is that the star and the heart unite on the cross.
Okay, this is perfect. I'm satisfied. I'm like, oh, thank God we got there before we had to end it. Because the purpose of this podcast is to give people a place to come consistently. And it's going to take a long time, I think, to truly grapple with this.
Oh, yeah.
But to understand how to be in right relationship to these 5 constraints, also given the individual that each of us are, with our longings, with our callings, with our temptations, with, And then obviously one of those constraints is social life. So like together. And that's a big question. I don't have all the answers. That's why I'm asking you. Asking other people.
I love the journey. Yeah.
So what I hear you, just to reiterate again what you just said, is that each of us has a star. To put that maybe just in plain language, like a calling, a longing, something, an inspiration, an ideal.
World. Yeah.
Yeah. And it, you know, not everybody has the whole, I want to change the whole world, but it's like,
right.
Yeah, longing to change family dynamics maybe, or have could be a relationship.
Parent.
Yes.
My husband. What?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And that what I heard you just say, and this feels really important because you literally, I think, described why I want to have this podcast. So at first, the ideal is, as you said, Luciferic. And how I might word that for people who don't know what that means is it's coming from a place of personal desire. I want. The world is not the way I want it to be, and I believe I can make it better. And that's perfectly natural. And then we maybe attempt to incarnate the ideal and manifest it in reality, not manifesting, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Actualize it in reality. And inevitably, anyone who's ever tried to do that will, I think, agree with us. You meet struggle, immense struggle, social struggle, financial struggle, environmental, whatever. And so that's nevertheless maybe the goal or the framework or the what's unfolding, the what is of being human and why we're here. And then our work as we grapple with these 5 constraints and for our own individual soul and spirit have an ideal that wants to come through us, we are grappling with these 2 wolves, as he said in the beginning. Which one will we feed? And we've got, again, because that ideal maybe came at first through Luciferic impulses, can it be, as you said, Christianized? Meaning, can it be, you know, the wolf that is loving and compassionate and empathetic and forgiving, versus am I feeding the wolf that is selfish and greedy and I want things my way, as we attempt to live the ideal?
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I love the impulse that you're carrying and the star that's inspiring you. It inspires me.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be doing this with you, and it feels so right to ask you to be the first to create these, you know, to put out these 3 podcasts. Yeah. And it almost feels like maybe you would call it grace or like a miracle that wouldn't have happened in the last 15 minutes. So, you know, a lot of the time I feel like maybe it's because of my upbringing or it's just who I am, but I feel something, I sense something, and I'm trying to articulate it. And it's like, it's not landing. Like we're not, what, it's not the right question, or it's not, So, that I actually feel extremely satisfied with the outcome of our grappling.
Yeah, that's another thing, to bless grappling.
Yeah.
You know, it's part of the journey.
Yeah. Was there anything in closing you would like to share with me or with the audience as we wrap up these 3 podcasts?
Oh, maybe just to say that my experience of life and what seems to be the most important thing, again, the most beautiful thing, when I look at biographies, when I work with biographies, when I work with other human beings, it seems that this love, kind of like for Ralph, this love and vitality and compassion that's born out of dying and becoming new. This love and compassion and vitality that can be felt when a human heart can bear grief and not lose joy, because joy has this wonderful capacity to embrace grief, even pain. When I experience that in myself and in others, that vitality that can also be born in and through and with suffering, I feel like that's the most human thing that I've ever found. That's the most nourishing thing for my heart. My heart feels the most in freedom in that space, in that type of consciousness. And to me, there's no more important aim than to dedicate my interest to seeing that vital love, that joy-filled pain in others, in myself, in the world. And so to me, that's my mission, actually, is to just help myself and help others to see that as the real world. The real world is the world of death and resurrection and love-filled bearing. And that is always possible in the presence of the unreal world. So that's my little sermon for the end, for my little word for the end.
Thank you. It's a beautiful mission. It's very needed.
Yeah.
And so we have shared links for people in other episodes, but you want to share where people can learn more about you if they want to?
Yeah, mostly probably on my podcast at patreon.com. And you just type in the light in everything, the light in everything. And myself and my colleague, Patrick Kennedy, have a podcast. We have many episodes. And then I also have a YouTube channel, Living with Christ, Reverend Jonah Evans, where there's also many episodes. So that's
your YouTube channel. It's sharing. I've watched many of them, and it's videos of. It's it's after the service.
Yeah. They're usually after the service. It's always on a Wednesday, and it's got a kind of usually between 40 and 60 people.
Yeah, and but there's also in person, so you're with people. Kind of unique, I think.
Really?
So Jonah is on Zoom with people online who can't attend physically, but he's recording that from the church, yeah?
Yeah, in the presence of about 20 people usually.
Yeah, which is, I think, pretty unique and kind of cool. And it kind of, if you're into this kind of thing, then you get to feel like you're being with others. But then you can watch the recordings and they're on Jonah's channel. So, Jonah, thank you so much for your time. We'll put all the links to you that we've been sharing so far in the descriptions or the show notes. And I'd love to have you back whenever you want to. If you're like, hey, I got a message for the world, Elisha, just let me know, or I will probably come knocking at your door at some point. So thank you again. This has been wonderful.
Pleasure. I look forward to it.